Well, the hole has always been there. We've been out there for a couple of years now, and the hole has been there since we've been there. It's been there since the previous owner was there. The previous owner there was quite elderly.
It's February 21st, 1997. The night had started like any other on Coast to Coast AM radio. Art Bell, with his show Somewhere in Time, would bring strange and unexplained stories to the airwaves. Tonight, Art is talking about a very interesting fax he received from a man by the name of Mel Waters, who described a hole that's on his property somewhere near Ellensburg, Washington. Mel goes into detail about the hole, which he measured to be around 9 feet in diameter. Mel thinks it could be some ancient well. There's a stone retaining wall around it that goes about 15 feet down, but from there down you can see nothing. Mel is asking for help from Art or any of his vast amounts of listeners in trying to identify what this hole could be. Now you're probably thinking, it's just a hole, how strange can this tale get? But, as you're about to find out, this is no ordinary hole, and the story becomes more twisted and unbelievable the more Mel talks about it. After reading the facts twice on his show, Art finally gets Mel on a live call to talk about the hole.
All right, when did you discover this hole?
Well, the hole has always been there. We've been out there for a couple of years now, and the hole has been there since we've been there. It's been there since the previous owner was there, and the previous owner there was quite elderly, and I'd say he was there for a good 30, 40 years before we moved in.
Wow.
Mel goes on to say that everyone in the area, including him, have been taking their trash and throwing it down the hole, including neighbors who lived there decades before him. Everything has been thrown into this hole: furniture, household trash, building debris, and even dead cows. But Mel started noticing really strange things happening around the hole. One thing that Mel started to realize is the hole never filled up, no matter how much trash everyone had been throwing down there. It was like a bottomless pit. And his dogs wouldn't go anywhere near the hole, even if you tried to pull them on a leash. They were terrified of the place for some reason.
Okay, well, so we've been there for several years, and we just take all of our trash, rubbish, anything we have that we have to get rid of, we take it, throw it in the hole. Everyone's throwing their stuff in the hole. The people from around there throw all the stuff in the hole. I mean, it's just been going on for a long time. Well, I got to thinking one day, how come this hole is not filling up? It must be an awfully deep hole.
That's a good thing to consider, sure, as you throw stuff in it for decades, literally.
Mel then tells how he emptied around 20 spools of fishing line, with a 1-pound weight tied to the end, into the hole, trying to figure out how deep it was. Soon he was buying fishing line in bulk and claims to have sunk about 80,000 feet of line into the hole. To put that into perspective, the deepest part of the Mariana Trench is 36,000 feet deep. He also noticed that yelling into the hole produced no echo, and no matter what you threw in the hole, you never heard it hit a bottom. Mel says they once tossed an old refrigerator down the hole, and there was no sound of it crashing to the bottom.
Before you began dropping this monofilament line into the hole with a weight, you threw an entire refrigerator down this hole, and then listened and listened and listened and never heard a thing?
Nothing. The refrigerator, I didn't hear anything.
There were other frightening stories that surrounded the hole. As Mel starts to talk to the other locals, he says that one guy told him the story about how he threw his departed canine into the hole. Days later, the guy was out hunting and said he saw his deceased dog running around, but thought, that can't be my dog. I know, I threw him down the hole. But it's not the only weird supernatural story surrounding the hole. Art Bell, ever the skeptic yet always open-minded, asked Mel if he could return to the hole and gather more evidence, record sounds, maybe try different experiments. But the more Mel talked, the more it became clear this was no ordinary mystery. After that first call, Art Bell and his audience were left in stunned silence. Who was Mel Waters? What was this hole? And, perhaps the most intriguing question of all, was it real? What started as an oddity, a strange deep hole in the earth, soon became something far more sinister. After Mel's first call, another fax came some days later, telling of some unnerving events. It seems that the US government had heard the story about Mel's hole and jumped into action. Mel described helicopters flying around his property, and as he tried to go to the hole, the road was blocked by some armed military personnel along with some heavy machinery. Mel asked one of the guards what's going on, and was told there was a plane crash on the property. I said, well, that's strange. I told him there's no smoke. I don't see any in the distance. He asked who I was, and I let him know I own the property. I then asked to talk to the officer in charge. A non-uniformed man came up to my Chevy Suburban and let me know that I won't have access to my property until the crash had been completely investigated. Mel then argued with the man that this was his land, to which the man replied that it's not necessarily his land, and that it would be very easy to find an illegal drug lab on the property. Mel understood what they were trying to do. The problem is that Mel had a small lab on his property where he was working on natural alternative medicine using plants. But they could say whatever they wanted and then seize Mel's property. Mel asked if he could leave, and the man said, "Sure, don't come back until we contact you." Mel said, "I suppose you won't want me to talk to anyone about this." He said, "Nobody would believe you anyway." But then Mel said something else that sounded downright terrifying. He told the story of how a neighbor he was talking to saw something like a black beam, blacker than black, coming out of the hole like a searchlight of darkness, reaching into the sky as far as he could see. The black beam was actually seen by many of his neighbors, and it's just one of the many strange phenomena associated with Mel's hole. With each new detail, the story becomes more and more unsettling. In March 1997, Mel said that he was made an offer he couldn't refuse. An offer to lease the property to the mystery people for $250,000 a month. The offer was to take the money and leave, never return, and never talk about the hole. Mel always wanted to live in Australia, so he took the offer and moved out of the country for a while. Mel said he continued his medicine research out there and was saving endangered wombats. Sometime around December 1999, after living in Australia for a couple of years, Mel started to miss his family and decided to come back. This probably wasn't a great idea because soon Mel found himself in big trouble. Despite the threats, Mel couldn't let the mystery of the hole go. He knew there was more to it than the government wanted people to believe, and he began to suspect that the hole wasn't just a strange natural phenomenon, it was something much bigger. Something that the government didn't just want to hide, they wanted to control. Mel came back from Australia and was staying with his nephew in Olympia, Washington, and called Art to make an appearance on his show with an update. But then something terrible happened and Mel disappeared. One night, while taking a bus back to his nephew's apartment, there was a fight on the bus. Mel says a couple of transit people wanted to talk to him about it and offers him a ride back to his nephew's. He stepped onto the transit van and it was the last thing he remembered. When he woke up, it was 12 days later and he was in a dangerous part of San Francisco, laying in an alley with no wallet, no identification, nothing but the clothes that he had on the day before. He noticed a pain in his arm and saw a needle mark from an IV. But that's not all. To his horror, he realized that all of his back teeth had been removed. This bizarre sequence of events raised more questions than ever. Who had taken Mel and why? What was the significance of his missing teeth? And how had he ended up in San Francisco without any memory of how he got there? The call ended as usual, and Mel would not be heard from again until 2002. But this time, he had a really horrifying story to tell. Apparently, Mel had found another hole in Nevada that seemed to have the same weird things going on around it as the hole on his property. Mel and the villagers decided to experiment. The first experiment was to lower a bucket of ice down into the pit as far as they could, which ended up being 1,500 feet. Meanwhile, they kept another bucket of ice with them on the surface as control, and waited for the control ice to melt halfway. Then they hoisted the ice in the hole back up to see how the two compare. The ice in the pit did not melt. However, the ice was now lukewarm, and even stranger, it remained solid even while sitting in Mel's hands. They decided to melt the ice by placing it over a fire pit. Rather than melting, the ice caught on fire. It was a heat-producing flame, but not a large yellow flame. Mel said the bucket of ice continued to burn for months, and he presumed it was still burning at the moment he was telling the story on the air. Mel said one guy even took some of the burning ice home to put on his stove, and it's been keeping his cabin warm in the winter. But now, Mel talks about something that sounds like it came from a horror film. At some point, they perform an experiment and lower a sheep down into the hole. But the only way you could get a sheep near the hole was to knock it out. Put it in a crate with a cable attached for lowering, and then put it over the hole. But the sheep woke up just before they got it to the hole, and it went crazy inside of the crate, knowing what was about to happen. The sheep struggled as they lowered the box, but about halfway point on the cable, there was no more movement. They left the sheep down there for 30 minutes, and then they hoisted it back up. There was no movement at all inside the crate as they brought it back to the top. Everything looked normal from the outside of the crate, but the sheep was now dead. It appeared to look normal from the outside. It was then decided to butcher it for an autopsy. The crazy thing is that the sheep looked like it had been cooked from the inside out, and there's a strange growth inside of the sheep. They cut open this growth, and inside, a creature that measured about 18 inches long and looks like a cross between a human fetus and a seal. Mel describes it as having human eyes and flippers of a seal. This weird creature looked up at the humans surrounding it as it was studying them. They stood staring at this thing for 2 hours as though they were hypnotized. The creature then moves towards the hole, looks at everyone, then turns around and jumps into the hole. It's an incredibly horrifying and scary story, right up there with the likes of H.P. Lovecraft. There's a lot of conspiracy theories when it comes to Mel's Hole. Some people believe it really does exist, and the US government has literally covered the whole thing up. But it makes you wonder, could the hole be part of a network of portals, a gateway to another dimension, or something far stranger like an ancient technology the government was desperate to keep secret? There are some things that we know for certain. Many people have investigated the story of Mel's Hole and were unable to find any public records of anyone named Mel Waters that lived or owned property anywhere in Ellensburg, Washington. The exact location of the hole has never been found, and according to an expert, the hole does not exist and is geologically impossible. A hole 15 miles deep would collapse into itself under the tremendous pressure and heat from the surrounding earth. There's also doubt about the story of lowering 80,000 feet of fishing line into a hole because heat from Earth at a certain depth would melt and snap the line. After Mel's final call, he vanished from the public eye. Officially, the story was chalked up to a hoax. Over the years, amateur investigators have tried to find Mel's property, claiming to have located the infamous hole. But without official records or coordinates, the exact location remains a mystery, if it ever existed at all. Even now, people continue to debate the existence of Mel's Hole, going over every detail of Mel's call with Art Bell. Theories range from the bizarre to the terrifying. Some claim it's a wormhole leading to distant parts of the universe. Others believe the holes are ancient structures built by a forgotten civilization or an alien race. Maybe Mel's Hole is a portal to a parallel universe. The universe that we know and exist in all began with the Big Bang, which expanded faster than the speed of light in a growth spurt called inflation. And for as long as there has been a universe, space has been expanding ever since it came into existence 13.8 billion years ago. And it continues to expand. As far as we know, our universe is a single expanding blob of space-time, speckled with trillions of galaxies that now stretches 93 billion light-years from edge to edge. But beyond this limit, there are things we cannot see that could be something more, or just an infinite expanse of nothingness. Our universe might be really, really big, but also finite, or it could be infinitely big. Both of these things are possibilities. However, if the universe is infinitely big, there are only so many ways that matter can arrange itself within that universe, and eventually, matter has to repeat and arrange itself in similar ways. If the universe is without an end, then it might just be home to parallel universes. If that sounds confusing, think of a deck of cards. If you shuffle the deck, there are only so many orderings that can happen. And if you shuffle it enough times, the order of cards has to repeat. With an infinite universe and only a finite number of complexions of matter, the way matter arranges itself will also have to repeat. That said, if a multiverse does exist, there would also be infinite versions of you. Other alternate versions of you might be doing the same thing you're doing right now, but some might be wearing different clothes and probably made vastly different career and life choices. You might drive a Ford Fiesta in one world, but drive a Ferrari in another. But how could this be possible? Because the observable universe extends only as far as light has traveled in 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang, the space-time beyond this distance can be considered to be its own separate universe. And if this is true, then there would be a multitude of universes existing next to each other in a giant patchwork of universes. Although the idea of parallel universes or a multiverse remains a mystery, with some calling the idea pure science fiction, it's still one of the biggest debates between experts, with some believing they exist while others disagree. So now let's take a look at why some researchers think they exist and the unexplained scientific events that could actually be proof that parallel universes might exist. But first, we need a little bit of physics to understand everything. In quantum theory, an elementary particle such as an electron doesn't exist in a single state, but a multiplicity of locations, velocities, and orientations. One of those most famous logic-defying experiments in physics is called the double-slit experiment. Waves that pass through two narrow slits will form an interference pattern on a screen. It doesn't matter if it's light waves, water waves, or sound waves. However, light isn't only a wave, it's also a particle called a photon. Now, here's where it starts to get weird. If you shoot a photon through the double slits, it still forms an interference pattern, as if the photon was traveling through both slits at the same time. But here's where it gets more bizarre. Just by observing the double slit experiment, the behavior of the photon changes. Even if the photons are sent through the slits one at a time, there is still a wave present that produces the interference pattern. This is a wave of probability, because the experiment is set up so the scientists don't know which of the two slits the single photon will pass through. But if they try to find out which slit the photon really goes through by setting up detectors in front of each slit, then the interference pattern doesn't show up at all. So the scientists tried a variation on the double slit experiment and placed a special crystal at each slit that would split any incoming photon into an identical pair. One photon should create the standard interference pattern, while the other would travel to the detector. But the strangest thing is that it still didn't work. This means that observing a photon can change events that have already happened. This is still one of the greatest mysteries of quantum mechanics. From a physics point of view, parallel universes are one of those imaginative and compelling theories that's very difficult to test, if not impossible. However, the idea of many worlds began in 1926, when physicist Erwin Schrödinger demonstrated that the subatomic world is fundamentally blurry. In our familiar human-scale reality, an object exists in one well-defined place. Put your phone on the table next to you, and it's in the only place it can be, regardless if you're looking at it or not. But in the quantum realm, objects exist in a small state of probability and snap into focus only when observed. Before you look at an object, whether it's an electron or an atom, it's not in any definite location. It might be more likely that you observe the object in one place or another, but it's not located in a particular place. After nearly a century of experimentation, this phenomenon is a core aspect of the physical world. It might sound crazy, and even Einstein struggled with the idea. What happened to all the other possible locations where the object could have been? And why should an object's behavior depend on whether or not somebody was looking at it? Someone was bound to come up with a radical explanation for this phenomenon. And in 1957, a man by the name of Hugh Everett III, while he was having a conversation with friends about physics, it was then he came up with the wild idea about how to fix this most perplexing problem in quantum mechanics. Therefore, Everett imagined a multiverse full of different realms in which all the possibilities dictated by quantum mechanics could exist at once. He proposed that all possible outcomes really do occur, but that only a single version plays out in the world we live in. All the other possibilities split off from us, with each one giving rise in its own separate world, and everything that can happen does happen in some world. All of this sounded really bizarre, and no one would take Everett seriously at the time. But now, some physicists are considering the possibility of a multiverse. In fact, theories of cosmology, quantum physics, and the very philosophy of science have some problems that could be solved if a multiverse existed. Along with the idea of multiple universes created by infinitely extending space-time, other universes could also come into existence from a theory called eternal inflation. We already talked about how the universe we're in expanded rapidly after the Big Bang and inflated somewhat like a balloon. Eternal inflation theorizes that some pockets of space stop inflating while others continue to inflate, giving the rise to many isolated bubble universes. That said, our own universe could be just a separate bubble in the vast sea of space that contains other bubble universes like ours. There's even another idea which comes from string theory called brane worlds, which are parallel universes that hover out of reach to our own. This theory is centered around the idea that there could be many more dimensions to our world besides the 3 space dimensions and the dimension of time. These 3-dimensional brane worlds could exist in a higher dimensional space. So, is it possible that a multiverse or parallel universes could exist? Well, recently there was a scientific experiment done, and the outcome was evidence of parallel universes. In 2016, a group of NASA scientists were working with NASA's Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, or ANITA for short. It's a high-altitude helium balloon with an array of radio antennas. This instrument was designed to detect ultra-high energy cosmic ray neutrinos, which are high-energy particles 1,000,000 times more powerful than anything we can create on Earth. And they're the only neutrinos that can reach Earth without being weakened or reduced. Low-energy subatomic neutrinos with a mass close to 0 can pass completely through Earth. However, high-energy particles would be stopped by the planet's solid matter, which is why high-energy particles are detected coming down from space, and a constant wind of these high-energy particles falls to Earth. But the team of NASA scientists were surprised when ANITA detected heavier particles called tau neutrinos coming up out of the Earth. If the particles were indeed real, it would mean that they would have been traveling back in time and could be evidence of a parallel universe. But this would also mean that the parallel universe would be running backwards in time. But the interesting thing about this is that if there were any inhabitants in this possible parallel universe, they would see us as the ones moving backwards in time. So what's really going on here? No one is certain yet, but the main investigator of ANITA said that they encountered a small number of anomalies in their data, and once they've exhausted all the possible explanations within the standard model of physics, only then will it be time to consider ideas that push those boundaries. But more evidence has been found out in space that could point to the existence of parallel universes. There are significant events in time and space that leave their marks on the cosmos, and the Big Bang left its footprint on everything we observe today. Recently, the European Space Agency's Planck satellite mapped the cosmic microwave background, the primordial microwave radiation that fills the known universe. This relic radiation is a perfect record of our universe from the moment it inflated and expanded. At first glance, the CMB looks to have a uniform temperature, but at micro-Kelvin scales, you can see variations in temperature in the form of hot and cold patches. This is due to tiny quantum density fluctuations that occurred when the universe was just born, meaning that matter wasn't even distributed, and some areas of the universe are more densely packed than others. But there's an intriguing mystery which concerns a large and unusually cold patch on the CMB, which is an astounding 1.8 billion light-years across. This CMB cold spot is much colder than the average CMB temperature, and this strange cold spot appears in the southern celestial hemisphere. Some researchers previously thought this space could be cooler simply because it had less matter than most sections of space. However, in a recently published survey of galaxies, astronomers say that this cold supervoid should not exist. And in a separate study, simulations suggested there was only a 2% probability that this cold spot formed randomly. However, researchers cannot entirely rule out the possibility. But if this is not the answer, then there could be more exotic explanations. One of those is that the cold spot was created by a collision between our universe and another bubble universe. Black holes are a major quandary when it comes to our understanding of physics because either they can destroy information, which contradicts what we know about quantum mechanics, or they disregard Einstein's theory of relativity. Now scientists are applying the many worlds theory, now called Everettian, to the black hole information problem. By using the many worlds interpretation, scientists are finding new ways to answer mysterious questions about black holes. Who knows, maybe black holes could have something to do with parallel worlds. Speaking of black holes, we have a new video here to check out if you haven't seen it yet. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you have some ideas on what you'd like to see next, let us know in the comments. And thanks for watching.